What is happening, you beautiful bastards? Welcome back to another week. This week, we talked to a gentleman named Chris Pellegrini. Chris knows everything Japanese spirit-wise, and not the ghost type, but the alcoholic type.
Yes, thanks for clarifying, Grizz. He's actually the founder of Honkaku Spirits. He's also the author of the Shochu Handbook. And we actually go into detail about shochu and soju. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I'm not an alcohol connoisseur. I'm new to this realm. And I think that's painfully obvious when we're talking to Chris.
But I think that helps.
I asked questions that all of you other non-alcoholic people are going to want to know because I don't know.
Although I asked the dumbest question of the night by far. But you have to listen to the episode to understand that.
So let's go talk to him.
What is happening, you beautiful bastards? So Jerry's clueless when it comes to pretty much anything that's alcoholic.
Yeah, that's true.
Jerry, do you know how whiskey is made?
In a barrel.
So when it comes to you specialize more in Japanese whiskey, or is it just whiskey in general?
I specialize in a couple of drinks that are really unknown to the outside world, and they are made in Japan too. Spirits as well. They're called shochu, shochu, and awamori. Two spirits with about 500, 600 years of history in Japan, which is where I live. I'm not in Japan right now. I'm in Washington, D.C. at the moment. But I've lived in Japan for the last 20 years. And my life is basically teaching the world about these drinks. Now, we do have a whiskey, too. So I'm not a complete novice where that comes from. In fact, I was talking about it all day today, and I have a bottle of it right here. It's called Takamine, which has a phenomenal story behind it. And it's pretty yummy.
Let's hear it.
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
This isn't supposed to be a marketing pitch, is it? I mean,
no, we talk about everything, man.
And okay, so as a little bit of trivia to start it off, for those of your listeners who have been to DC or who even live in the Mid-Atlantic, you probably know about the cherry blossom festivals that happen every year around this time, and that's why I'm here. The thing that most people don't know is that the gentleman who donated the cherry trees to the Washington, D.C. that line the tidal basin was a Japanese fellow by the name of Dr. Jokichi Takamine. And he also happens to be the first Japanese person to have ever made whiskey in the history of forever and ever. So most people know Japanese whiskey as being Suntory, Nikka, and the guy who's behind both of those brands is a gentleman named Masataka Taketsuru. But he wasn't the first guy to make whiskey, or not the first Japanese person to make whiskey. The first Japanese person to make whiskey was Dr. Takamine, and he was doing it in Peoria, Illinois in the 1890s.
Of course.
So this guy was ridiculous. How do I tell this story? So this should be a Hollywood movie, I swear. So there's a young guy in Japan, precocious as all get out, ends up heading the Japan Patent Office for the government at a very young age. He gets sent to the World Cotton Exhibition, which apparently was a thing back in the mid 1800s. Boy meets girl. Boy loves the hell out of girl. Boy has no money. So boy retreats back to Japan and makes his first fortune in phosphate mining, as you do. And he then goes back to America, marries a girl. They have a couple of kids, a couple of boys. The eldest, I think, is Joe Kichi Jr. And number two, the spare, was Ebenezer, I believe was his name. I'm not joking. That actually was his name. And so then he was a patent guy, and he was a chemist, and he's a doctor. He was
everything that lines up perfect for whiskey.
Well, I know, it's like, what the heck is going on? But he he was pretty intense, and he was very industrious. And even on their honeymoon, apparently they went around and visited fertilizer factories as you do on your honeymoon.
That's romantic.
Because he was researching.
I was gonna say it sounds like Japanese.
He was a winner, and he got the girl, and she went along with all of this. And then in the interim, he applies for and is granted the first ever biologic patent in U.S. history. And it was, I don't know how this worked out, but he got a patent for using koji, which is a fungus that is essential to Japanese fermentation, for use in making bourbon. So he patented this special process. It's not special. I mean, everybody in Japan uses koji to make sake, soy sauce, miso, shochu, awamori, and a bunch of other fermented delicious things. But he, I guess, kind of finagled it. He worded it correctly so that the patent office gave him this patent. So then he licensed that to the Illinois Whiskey Trust. And the Illinois Whiskey Trust, it was a monopoly to end all monopolies. They owned all of these distilleries around the states. They owned more than 2/3 of whiskey production in the US in the 1890s. They were price rigging the whole 9 yards. They were able to do whatever they wanted. And with this koji fermentation process, which borrows heavily from sake making traditions in Japan, they stood to save in the order of 15% or so on their production costs.
That's a lot.
So that's not negligible. No. And they were buying what Takamine was selling. So he licensed the patent to them, and they set him up in the Manhattan Distillery in Peoria, Illinois, in the early 1890s. And he got to work with his experiments, trying to create a maltless whiskey. And he was soon successful. It took him a couple of years, but he figured it out. They had a streamlined process, and it got written up in the Chicago Tribune, which even in those days was a big deal. And it was something to the effect of whiskey to become cheaper and, maltless whiskey, blah, blah, blah. Now, maltless whiskey, probably to most people, is a perfectly benign thing. But to people who make malt, the maltsters, that was a serious threat to their livelihood. And it was a threat to their livelihood brought upon them by a foreign guy.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think they did?
Yeah, it wasn't pretty.
It wasn't pretty. They broke into the distillery and they tried to kill him.
Nice.
But, lighting being as it was in the 1890s, you break into a distillery at night, it's pretty dark. And Takamine knew the distillery way better than the would-be murderers did. So he escaped into the bowels of the distillery. They couldn't find him. So they had to settle for torturing his lab, which they did to a very high degree of competence. So the lab was gone. That set him back by a couple of years. They didn't touch another part of the distillery. The rest of the distillery was completely unscathed. They were meticulous in their attack. And so he gets back up and running. He's producing whiskey now, koji whiskey. This is not malt whiskey, it's koji whiskey. If you know anything about making beer, I brewed beer as a kid. If you know about making beer, if you know about making whiskey, you need a kettle for a boil, you need a mash tun, you need a lauter tun. None of this equipment was necessary anymore with this new process, the koji whiskey process. And he patented this process. And so in late 1894, they're barreling this koji whiskey, and then frickin' government regulation butts its ugly nose into the equation. This was Teddy Roosevelt's day. He was very antitrust. He was a trust buster, very populist message. And there was something called the Sherman Antitrust Act that was mostly a paper tiger. It was used as a threat to keep these gigantic monopolies in line, but it was actually used against the Illinois Whiskey Trust. And the entire monopoly was busted up. The assets were sold off, auctioned off to the highest bidder, and his patent was one of those assets. He never got it back. So this whole, the remarkable thing is that Takamine was like 2 months, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months of aging away from koji whiskey becoming an American tradition.
Right.
Right. but it's just like he was just a little too early. You know, he was ahead of his time just a little bit too much. But, you know, the man's a legend. He's probably the most consequential Japanese person to have ever lived in the United States. And I apologize to the Shohei Otanis and the Ichiro Suzukis and you know, the Hideki Matsuis of the baseball world who have done great things, you know, with a baseball bat. But they can't hold a candle to Dr. Jokichi Takamine. He took his knowledge. I have some of these things. Oh, hold on just a second. I have some of these things.
Yeah.
Where the hell is it? There it is. Okay. So he had this knowledge of Koji, and Koji it's a mold, it's a fungus that is expert in breaking starches into simple soluble sugars, namely glucose, which then you can ferment with. The enzymes that Koji excretes are various amylase enzymes and protease enzymes. And he took his knowledge of this enzymatic action to make a early like an upset stomach remedy, which he bottled it as takadiastase. And he sold this off to, you know, it was an early Tums or an early Rolaids almost, you know. And so he made a second fortune. The first one was phosphate mining. Number two was takadiastase. He licensed it to Parke-Davis, which is a huge pharmaceutical concern. So licking his wounds. I don't know how bent out of shape he was about failing at the whiskey, but he moved his family from Illinois to Harlem and had this beautiful house. And he had a home laboratory, which I guess chemists did back in that day. I don't know. But the really cool thing is that in his home laboratory, we got this off of eBay. This is an actual historical specimen. He isolated medical adrenaline in his lab. So epinephrine.
This guy was into everything.
Yeah. So EpiPens, millions and millions and millions of lives saved over the last 100 years because this guy was a legend. So he licensed that off to Parke-Davis as well. Fortune number 3. He spent his later years, incredibly humble man, spent his later years working on Japanese-American relations, doing whatever he could he was kind of like almost like an informal ambassador, really. He's a Japanese guy, so the gentlemen's clubs in New York couldn't join those. You're not going to let a foreign guy in, right? So he's like, fine, I make a lot more money than you. I'll start my own club. So he started the Nippon Club, which exists to this day. Absolutely remarkable institution. And then, as I said at the top of this long story, I apologize, he facilitated and paid for the cherry tree donation to Washington, D.C. and to Grant's tomb up in New York. So he is an absolute legend. Died in 1922, funeral at St. Patrick's Cathedral. A very consequential human in his day, but nobody knows who he is now. So it's kind of disappointing. And one of my hopes is that with Takamine Koji Whiskey, if enough people hear this story, finally people in Japan will start to hear about him, because my friends' kids don't learn about him in elementary school. I'm like, what the hell is that? He's an immense intellect, humanitarian. What more could he have done? And
people are going to hear about him now.
Teach about him in elementary school, for crying out loud. So hopefully what happens with this is that some American distilleries start to experiment with Koji whiskey, and they start to make their own expressions. And then we get that back into Japan. And then finally, then that's the big time. Then Takamine, maybe people start to think about it a bit more.
Because I know in the beer world, they're starting to get like crazy with what they're doing. And that's going to transition into the spirits. Like, it just has to. I mean, some of the beers they're doing right now, I try and I'm like, I don't know what they were going for, but this ain't it. So what made you...
Beer, yeah. Man, beer.
Did you grow up in Japan, or did you move there later in life?
I moved there later in life. I followed a girl. As you do.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
That's how it goes. Yep. So, and it was lucky. We planned to be in Japan for a year, but 1 year became 2, and 2 became 3, and 3 became a mortgage, and then we're still there 20 years later. So,
So did you find out about this guy before or after you went over there?
I knew about him before. I didn't know about the whiskey though.
Okay.
I knew about his philanthropy. The whiskey was a much more recent discovery, and it was around that time that we started to work with a distillery in Fukuoka, Japan, down in the southwestern island of Kyushu, and they were a big fan of his too. And then collectively, we approached the family using the word trust again, very different type of trust, but the family trust that exists in Japan. His great grandchildren run it, and they are very protective of the name Takamine. I know it's a guitar brand too, but this is a totally different family. And so we approached them and we said, hey, we know you only really allow his name on scientific or educational endeavors, never anything commercial. We're trying to bring a little respect to your great-great-granddad's name. So what do you say? And they actually, after a while, they came around, and now they're some of our biggest cheerleaders. So we're really, we're really stoked that we can bring this story to people in the States.
Is normal, or what we would consider Japanese whiskey, is that not the same then?
That's a fantastic question. The answer is no, it's not the same. Reasons are, by Japanese tax law, at least 10% of what's in the bottle has to be made from malted grains. That's a law.
Interesting.
If not at least 10%, and you can blend in a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not even really whiskey at all. But that doesn't matter. As long as it has to be at least 10% in order for it to be labeled in Japan as a whiskey by taxation law, which means that because Takamine Koji whiskey has zero malt, it's Koji. It's same result, different process. And Koji is a Japanese process. Malt is a European process, right? So we're using a Japanese process to make a whiskey, but it's very different from a whiskey in that sense. Now, the way that it's similar is that it's aged in barrels. So that's what most whiskey is. Most whiskey is aged for a number of years in a variety of oak with a variety of different char levels. And this is aged in 90% ex-bourbon casks and then 10% virgin oak from Missouri, shipped to Japan, coopered there. And 9 years later.
I never thought there would be people who were so concerned about the wood that like liquid sat in, but that's your world, I got to imagine.
Where does all of the flavor, all of the aroma, all of the color in a whiskey come from? It doesn't come from the still. It comes from the damn wood, right? It comes from the barrel. So. But the process doesn't change the flavor in any other way. Like it's completely identical. I would argue that the Koji adds a layer of complexity, especially in the mid-range. That Koji is famous for creating the savory notes in Japanese food. Savory. There's a a lot of times they call it the sixth flavor on the palate. Umami. UMAMI. It's that meaty, savory flavor that you get from tomatoes and mozzarella cheese, many types of cheese, a lot of meat. It's a really rich part of the flavor spectrum. And Koji adds that to most of what it touches. So a lot of people that I've tasted on it, they just feel like it has a richer midsection. The attack is very whiskey. It's very much what you would expect. And then it's the mid-range where there's this wild interplay of sweeter notes that almost remind you of a wheated bourbon, over the top of grainier notes that would remind you something more of something a little bit like a malt, and then a really nice long finish. So is it different? I think to the casual imbiber, it wouldn't be a huge difference other than, it's all delicious. To a serious whiskey nerd, they're going to be like, whoa, this is interesting. This is interesting. And it's been doing well. It keeps the lights on. So, very grateful.
No, that's fascinating, man. I'm going to have to check that out because.
Yeah. Now I've actually just within the last year or so, I've started down the path to becoming a whiskey sophisticate. I'm nowhere near it. I'm nowhere near it yet. I'm actually still learning terminology. Like, what am I asking for when I ask for a certain flavor, whatever. So one that I have in the old wine fridge downstairs is Bullet Bourbon Rye. I'm not sure if you've ever had that.
I have.
But what I enjoy it. But what I'm told is the rye, it gives it a certain spice. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you know what spice I'm talking about.
Mhm.
I haven't decided if I like that or not. I do know that I'm almost done with the bottle, but I'm wondering, what gives it that spice, and does yours have anything similar? And I'm not sure what I'm asking, so I could be completely off base here.
Well, it's the rye. It's the grain. It's the specific type of grain that gives it that spiciness. And if you're a rye drinker, then you really look for it. You really want it. Takamine doesn't have that. There's no rye in the mash bill. It's all two-row barley. So pretty typical for a lot of whiskey production, except for, of course, bourbon, which is made with corn. But hey.
And then now, what were the other two spirits that you said you guys specialized in?
I happen to be a very, very like high octane nerd when it comes to shochu, shochu, and awamori, awamori, which are Japan's indigenous spirits. And I wrote a book about them in 2014 because that's how intensely nerdy I was about these things. And I have been doing everything I got. The Japanese government knighted me as an official ambassador for these spirits, and lets me go around the world trying to get people hammered. And the funny thing about getting people drunk and trying to teach them something is that they forget what you taught them. So it's not a great plan. But eventually I started to get a little bit disappointed with the pace of uptake internationally for these spirits. Now, to give you an idea of how big this is in Japan, Japanese shochu and Japanese awamori, there is more shochu and awamori made in Japan than tequila in Mexico.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? Now, close to 2/3 of tequila is exported. A lot of it comes north to us, right? But less than 0.1% of shochu and awamori ever leave the country of Japan. It's this gigantic industry hiding in plain sight. There's more shochu and awamori consumed in Japan every year than sake.
Yeah, sake is the only thing that I've knowingly consumed that was Japanese alcohol. I'm a big fan. When I go to our hibachi grills here, the guy actually stops. He sprays it in your mouth. He's like, "What? Tell me when you've had enough." I just don't stop him. He has to cut me off.
Now, is it
I've never
similar
heard
to
of that before. That sounds like a recipe for a pretty impressive next day.
I've heard of soju before, but I heard it in Korea. Is it similar?
That's right. It's actually not. They rhyme, and Americans are just unendingly confusing the two, and I can tell you exactly why in a moment. But Korean soju, and I lived in Korea too. I lived in Korea for a couple of years before moving to Japan, and most soju, not all of it, but the green bottle stuff that we see everywhere these days. Green bottle stuff is actually made in a column still, which is the type of still that's used to make vodka. Most of the spirit used to make gin, and a lot of other spirits is made in a column still. A column still is a modern still. It's a modern machine that creates, basically when you're making a spirit, you've got a trade. There's a trade-off. You can either have more alcohol or more character. You can't have both. You got to make a trade. For vodka and for Korean soju, the decision has been made to go for maximum ethanol. And when I say maximum, they distill in a column still up to 95, 96% ethanol, which is about as pure as you can as you can get chemically.
I was saying, my memory is that it put me on my face.
Yeah, right. Hey, oh, you actually remember that? Okay, that's.
Well, no, I was told, but.
And then they will dilute down to bottle proof. For vodka, it's 40 plus. For Korean soju these days, when I lived in Korea, it was usually 22, 23% ABV. These days, it's 16, 17, 18% because they're trying to protect profit margins in the industry. And then they add sweeteners. So in the past, it was things like aspartame, sorbitol, stevia, essentially, a bunch of synthetic sweeteners that are used to I make it work really well with spicy Korean barbecue, and it works. And you chill the bottles, you pour them communally, you drink it at pace. It's a lot of fun. Next day is interesting. However, that is very, very different. Yeah, it can be impressive. The next day, notwithstanding, that is a big part of the drinking culture, in the drinking and eating culture in Korea, and it's an absolutely glorious thing, which I don't mean to disparage. What I would like to disabuse people of is the fact that it is a completely different tradition from the shochu that I'm talking about. Shochu, authentic shochu, is made only in a pot still. It's old school, and that's a law. You can't use a column still. You can't use the modern stuff. You have to use a pot still, and you get one chance at it. So there's one distillation, and then what you have is what you get. So if you had a shitty fermentation, you're going to get a product that you can't sell. And that's the challenge of shochu and awamori, and how they're so different from other clear spirits, many other clear spirits, especially soju. And you know, there's so much diversity in this category. I mean, I've got a couple. I just emptied my bag, so I got them right here. This is a sweet potato shochu called Colorful, which is, it's a clear spirit, but you wouldn't know it by the nose on this thing. And then it's only 30% alcohol. And then this is a barley shochu called Mugi Hokka, which is only 25% ABV. In Japan, they trade up on character at the expense of alcohol percentage, and it's pretty remarkable. And like I said, it outsells sake in Japan, so clearly they're doing something right. Now in the US, Americans conflate the two like it's their damn job. Soju and shochu,
Americans
everything,
were
they're
dumb.
the same thing.
Come on.
And you know, well, in some cases, and it's not really the consumer's fault. You know whose fault it is? California. It's
We can always
California's fault.
We love blaming California over here.
I have no problem with that right now. So California in the 90s, thanks to some hardcore lobbying by the Korean community in that state, they changed the liquor licenses. Not the hard liquor. There's a hard license and a soft license. Hard license is basically a full bar license. Soft license is what is informally known as a beer and wine license, and they're much cheaper to get and much more flexible. They changed the soft license only in California because there's such a huge Korean community, and they were like, we can't have soju because it's the spirit with our Korean barbecue and our normal food, because none of these restaurants can afford a full bar license in order to, just to get soju. So they lobbied, and they went at it hard for a long time. And eventually the California legislature amended the soft license law to allow soju, S-O-J-U, as long as it clearly showed that on the label. It's clearly written on the label, and it was no higher than 24% ABV. So in other words, in California state, almost any restaurant that has a beer and wine license, really anybody can serve this spirit as well, which is, if there are some types of soju that don't have a whole lot of sweetness to them. So you could make kind of a low octane cocktail with it. It's almost like a vodka substitute, and it's cheap. So
I was gonna say, when I drank it, it was very similar to vodka.
Yeah. And that's
just
by
mix
design.
it with everything.
Yeah. So what happened next is what is confusing everyone. Back in the 90s, the shochu makers of the world in Japan weren't selling a whole lot of booze in the States, and they saw an opportunity. And they thought, well, what if we just wrote soju on the label and standard is 25% alcohol. So they're like, we'll dilute one more point, and then we'll be able to sell this to like sushi bars and shit. It'll be great. And they didn't. It was so. There was worse. It makes me want to kick people in the shins. It's just like generations of consumers are confused because there are shochu bottles from Japan that say soju on the front freaking label. So of course everybody's confused. Of course everybody thinks they're the same thing. And these labels don't stay in California. They get chucked all across the states. You can find them where I'm from in Vermont, right? It's just so everybody's confused. Nobody knows the difference between shochu and soju, and it does not help that they rhyme, of course.
I was saying they sound so damn similar, man.
I know, it's unfair. So Americans are conflating the two. So many people have had rough next day mornings with Korean soju, and so they're just like, yeah, I've tried the shochu before. I'm not going to do that again. So it's unfortunate, and it's an own goal.
So then, with that kind of history behind it, what exactly is Japanese shochu? And
Great question. So,
how do you say the other one?
awamori. That one's a little bit more of a mouth.
Awamori.
Awamori. Yep.
Awamori.
awamori. Yeah.
So what are
a quick?
Oh, go ahead.
I just I know you didn't ask for this, but I'll give you a quick Japanese language pronunciation guide here. The beautiful thing, it's a nightmare to try to learn to read and write. I'll just take my word for it. But one nice thing is the pronunciation. There's only 5 vowel sounds in Japanese, and they never change. A, E, I, O, U. That's it, right? So there's no tricks to this. Just imagine that they're Spanish vowels. So A is A, E is A, I is E, O is O, U is U. That's it. So when you see this word, for instance, right here at the top, M-U-G-I, you can pronounce that, right? Think it's Spanish. Think of it as Spanish.
Mugi? I'm not very good. Okay. Okay.
You broke his brain.
U is U. So I is E.
You put me on the spot. I was just thinking, oh God, now I'm gonna sound like an idiot in front of everybody. All right.
Great. I love it.
That was an you didn't ask for that tutorial, but hopefully that helps somebody. So what is shochu? What are shochu and awamori? It's pretty simple. They are Japan's indigenous spirits. They are spirits made from approved ingredients. There are 53 approved ingredients, and they're koji. Okay, so it's koji is that mold that I was talking about before.
Right.
So 53 approved ingredients. It's probably the most diverse spirits class that nobody's ever heard of. And everything tastes like what it's made from. The most popular, a couple other rules, has to be pot distilled, single pot distilled, as I mentioned before. So you get a relatively low alcohol percentage with a lot more character. The other thing that's required is no additives are permitted except for water and thyme. And that's T-I-M-E, not T-H-Y-M-E. All right, so you can age it, you just can't add anything to it. So no sugars, no sweeteners, no umami enhancers, no body enhancers, no color. You know, in whiskey they add caramel to balance out the color. In some brands, that's not allowed. Never. So it's a really strictly defined style that actually is protected internationally by the WTO. At least 4 regional styles are protected. Just like champagne can only be made in that region of France and Scotch can only be made in Scotland, there are types of shochu and awamori that can only be made in very specific regions. And even Japanese folks don't realize this.
What is WTO?
WTO, the World Trade Organization.
Oh, that one. My bad.
It's the WTO.
I was like thinking there was going to be fucking like some like whiskey something. And I'm like, God damn. And I'm not even thinking about the World Trade Organization. Wow, I'm a dumbass. All right.
Now it's your turn.
I was really waiting for you to get there.
Man, we're doing good.
Yeah. Sorry.
No worries.
That's all right. You can snip that part. I know you guys won't.
I'll leave it in. I'm a dumbass and I accept it.
Our listeners already know. They know what they're getting into.
Oh my God, that was fucking great.
Yeah, so it's
I have not been drinking for the record.
You haven't. Is this because of the cough?
Yeah, completely sober.
That's part of the problem.
It probably is.
Yeah, so it's just anyways, to summarize that little ditty, it's Japan's best kept secret.
Now, what does it taste like? And is there like something that we get here normally that we can compare it to be like, if you like this, you'll probably like shochu and awamori? That's a great question. It's a tougher question too. If you drink whiskey, if you like spirits,
you're gonna be able to figure it out. Now, some of the flavors, like sweet potato shochu, as lovely as that probably sounds to a lot of people, the American experience with sweet potatoes is really quite limited. And some of the flavors and aromas that come out of sweet potato shochu might catch a lot of people by surprise. Having said that, the spirits drinkers, like the nerdy ones, like the mezcal drinkers and the Jamaican rum drinkers, and anybody who likes things that are funky, they come to shochu with a very open mind generally, and they're very welcoming. But what I can say is that generally it tastes like what it's made from. So if one of the approved ingredients is, for instance, carrots. Carrot shochu tastes like carrots. I don't know why they make it, but hey, whatever. If you have, and then you have rice shochu, it tastes like rice. Or it tastes like, you like sake, so you're going to notice some things in the rice shochu that remind you of the tropical notes from a sake, and the steamed rice notes, and sometimes the dairy, the yogurt notes. And then there's some weirdos. There's like, I don't know how to tell you what silver vine shochu tastes like, but it tastes like silver vine, right? Silver vine is catnip's more potent cousin. Essentially, it's you give a cat catnip, and they're pretty buzzed for a while. But you give a cat silver vine, that's like a weekend bender. I mean, it is intense, and they can make an approved shochu ingredient. Why? I have no idea why. It's a regional thing, and it got on the tax office list back in the day, and it's one of the 53 approved ingredients. So there's a lot of diversity. And then you've got this koji stuff again, right? The mold, there's actually 3 different types, and they all express differently when you use them. They're very easy to remember because they're differentiated by the color that they present as. They're yellow, black, and white. And yellow koji is used to make almost all sake. And it tends to highlight the fruity and the floral notes in the sake. But the one weakness of yellow koji is that it doesn't create a lot of acidity in the fermentation, which means that other microbes in the air or organisms can jump in and mess everything up. They can start eating the glucose and then create off flavors, and then you've got a messed up batch. So that's why in Japan, sake making season tends to be in the north, and it tends to be during the winter, so that you can minimize the number of ne'er-do-wells in the atmosphere that'll hop in there and take a seat at the buffet. Then there's white and black. Black is the most interesting, in my opinion. It can variously be earthy and ashy. It can also have a very pleasing sweetness depending on the raw ingredients that it's mixed with. And then you got white, which is in the middle. It's kind of it can kind of go a little bit in either direction depending on many different factors. But those, just the 53 ingredients plus the 3 different types of koji plus the various yeast strains that are available, you've got massive diversity in this spirits class. And every year there's like 5,000 brands that are produced. So the next time you hear somebody refer to Japanese shochu as Japanese vodka, please turn their elbow inside out.
So basically what we're saying here is, like, the question I asked you, like, what does it taste like, is kind of like saying, hey, what does wine taste like? You can't really answer that.
You need to try it yourself. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you, well, for instance, this is a barley shochu, mugi hokka. It's made with 8% roasted barley in the mash. I can tell you what it tastes like. It tastes like French breakfast. When you're sipping this, you get a little bit of a yeasty quality with espresso notes and cacao or chocolate. And it's beautiful. And it's crazy because it's clear. So a lot of people look at it like, oh, is that a Japanese vodka? No, it's not. It's a character. You
just throw the bottle
dumbass. Yeah, right, exactly. After I finish it.
Yeah, of course. Now, are you able to get these stateside, or is it a massive pain in the ass?
Well, where are you guys located, if you don't mind my asking?
We're not far from Vermont. I'm in Rhode Island.
And I'm in Connecticut. So we're up here in New England.
Gotcha. Okay, so then Rhode Island, not yet. Connecticut, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Mass?
Mass, yes.
Because I'm right over the border in Mass.
Yeah, we are distributed in both of those states. I was just in Connecticut earlier this week on Wednesday. I was
I'm
in
so
New
sorry.
Haven.
Oh, no kidding. That's really not far from us at all.
Okay. Well, if you are looking for the whiskey, then the wine thief. The Wine Thief in New Haven is a bottle shop that carries Takamine.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the place. I used to drive by it all the time.
Yeah, I went there. I went to Olive and Oil for a drink. They messed up my beer order twice. How's that happen? And they got it right on the check, but they brought me the wrong beer 2 times.
How do you miss
and then
a beer order? A beer order is easy.
I know. There's like one stout on the menu. Bring me the damn stout. They brought me
And that
a
probably a
West
Guinness.
Coast IPA that had enough hops in it to make you feel like you were shoving a brush fire up your nose. But anyways, then we moved
Thank
on
you.
to this noodle place that's around the corner that's quite famous. I can't remember what it's called. It's called Mecha, which was really good. Yeah, and recommend it. Anyways, yes, I'm familiar with the underbelly of Connecticut.
I'm glad you know that's what it is.
I just see the train line trickling up the underside of it. It's like, okay, I think I'm going back again on Wednesday. So.
How did you get into doing spirits in Japan?
I used to brew beer in my closet when I was a kid, unbeknownst to my parents, of course. And it was part of a project in school, and I learned about prohibition, and everybody was moonshining and like making their own. Just I got to learn how to do that, and it turns out that it wasn't that tricky. So me and one of my best friends from high school started brewing beer, and it was at first it sucked. It was like horrid. And then we started to figure out how to keep everything
Usually how it
clean and
goes.
create some consistency. And then we started we had 3 brands. We had labels and shit. And we used to abscond with soda kegs that our friend used to provide to us. And we'd clean them out. And we'd keg our own beer and show up at bonfires and stuff. And we were the most popular underclassmen in the school. And eventually my parents found out, and they weren't really very happy. My mother is a deacon in the Episcopal Church, and my father was the principal of the local high school. So
So that was the ultimate disappointment.
They stood to lose some social standing if this came to light. So they put they shut down our operation. But I took that experience, and I went to, maybe you've heard of them. It's a microbrewery in Middlebury, Vermont called Otter Creek.
Yep.
And I went to Otter Creek and I said, hey, I want to open a brew pub someday. Please teach me how to make beer. And I ended up being kind of an informal apprentice at the brewery for a while. And then one fateful week, not too long into my tenure there, I was still in high school. And this is not funny, but the first part's not funny. The second part is hilarious. Our first brewer wrecked his back and was kind of in traction for a couple of months, couldn't lift any heavy bags. So we lost a brewer. Same damn week, our second brewer left the state to go join the circus, as you do. And so he wanted.
That's the most Vermont thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, it totally is.
So we didn't have anybody who could make the product. So Lawrence Miller, the guy who basically started this business, it also grew out of a home brewing project, except for that he was of legal drinking age when he did so. He came in, all hands on deck meetings, like, who up in this joint knows how to make beer? And I was like, oh, he's like, the kid? And so fortunately, Tom, our cellar master, is like, well, if he doesn't drink it, he's legally allowed to make it. All right, Pellegrini, you're up. And I became the youngest commercial brewer in the United States. I was too young to drink what I was making. You couldn't talk to me about Rolling Rock. Get out of here with that.
You did drink it anyway, right?
Of course I did. Yeah.
Of course.
I mean, even Tom.
How are you
going
to make beer and not taste it?
Buddy, you're drinking it. You're tasting it at 4 different points in the process, because if something goes wrong, you're our first line of defense. So we got to know if something smells or tastes off. So yeah, I think the statute of limitations has lapsed on that, so I should be all right.
Well, we're not going to tell anyone anyway.
We'll just keep censoring out your name.
I know you guys are like a vault.
Listeners, keep this a secret.
Yes. Just send out the NDAs right now.
So how's your American infiltration going so far?
It's going okay. The sales, I'm here as an educator. I do a lot of staff trainings and a lot of tastings, but I'm also here trying to learn how to sort of become a salesperson. And in New York, people don't like salespeople very much, so it's been very exciting.
It's not just New York. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, no, that's fair. But in New York, they're very quick to use rather rude words and gestures and things like that. So
the United States in general.
Yeah, well, but to be fair, it is like I was in Atlanta last year just doing cold calling accounts, and they were just like, nobody ever visits us, so they were kind of they would listen for a little bit anyway before they tell you to go get stuffed. But in New York, it was much more of a, we don't do walk-ins, get the fuck out, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like I came all the way from Tokyo to Japan to share something with you, and that's how you're going to treat me. Okay, I see. Gotcha. So you need some thick skin.
The way the craft is nowadays, they'd be totally willing to accept something new. Because it's kind of in that fashion,
Yeah, they just don't like being surprised. They want it scheduled, and I think sales has changed, like not for the worse necessarily, but it has changed in an irrevocable manner over the last 2 years. So just people are they're sourcing things differently. There's the salesperson in general, at least in the beverage alcohol space, it's a harder job now. You, as a salesperson, I think you have to know not only your own business back to front, but you also have to know your customer's customer. You have to know their business back to front. And if you don't, then it's so much more about relationships now, I guess. I think it always was. And forgive me, I'm not a salesperson. I'm just trying to learn the ropes and be able to offer advice and commiserate with the people who do
especially within booze. It sounds like it's a lot about who you know, because if you're not in on that certain trucking business or whatever, you are screwed.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, even though it's illegal, there's a lot of pay to play. So you gotta know how to, if you're not willing to play that game, and we can't afford to, then you got to find other ways to get people's attention and to create relationships and make sure that you're offering added value at every point along the distribution process. It takes a different type of salesperson with a different type of mentality, more different skill set. So,
but it also sounds like you have something pretty special to share with people, and that kind of thing people will seek out, like, so they'll go that extra distance to find something like that versus just going to the closest bar that's down the street that has 13 beers on the menu, and that's it.
Right, and they don't know how to talk about them or anything. Yeah,
sure. Exactly.
Yeah, I hope so. And it's getting better. I swear it's getting better. I mean, like I said, I've been traipsing all across the planet trying to, force feed people these drinks. And until like 2018, it wasn't easy. People were like, oh yeah, I've heard of that stuff. No, thank you. You have not. Nobody's heard of this stuff. What are you talking about? You're thinking about something entirely different. But last year we got a booth at what's it called? Not Beer Convent, Bar Convent, Brooklyn, BCB, which was an annual trade event where bartenders, bar managers, buyers, whatever, everybody in the trade would get together and be exposed to new brands. And it was, the reception was unbelievable. It was overwhelming. We were just slammed for 2 days straight with people like, oh, I don't know about this shochu stuff, but I know these guys are the nerds. We gotta go taste what they have. Something changed. Something has moved in this direction. I think the pandemic opened people's heads. I think it made people really yearn for something cool to get into again, because I feel like they haven't done that in a long time. I think it also, we had the whole mezcal thing, which taught people that clear spirits can be really interesting. We had this ongoing natural wine thing where American consumers are doing anything they can possibly do to pretend like they like some of these crappy wines. And so I think there was a recalibration that is a significant opportunity, I feel, for these indigenous spirits from Japan. There's not a lot available yet, but there's more people getting into it who actually have their heart's in the right place, they actually want to bring quality. In the future, once money is apparent, then there'll be all sorts of opportunists. But right now, it's actually pretty good. There's a lot of quality coming over, so it's a good time to be digging into shochu if you're an American consumer.
Yeah, I hope it's all. I think part of it's got to be there catching that wave that came out of craft beers, right? Craft beers exploded. Now there's so many people are like, all right, I'm going to reach into something new.
Yeah, with the rise of the hipster in about 2010 was a big boon to craft alcohol of all kinds, really.
You're not wrong, and no lies detected there. This stuff is certainly craft. I mean, at least in our portfolio, we've got all of these tiny makers. We get complaints. The people who complain are the loyal customers of distilleries like Shodo that makes colorful. Like I live in Tokyo. I can't buy this brand in Tokyo because they don't make enough of it. And yet because the guy who makes it is a friend of mine, and I just begged and cajoled him for months, and then he finally was like, okay, shut up. Yeah, I'll sell you some. And his loyal customers get pissed when they see it on Instagram in the States, and like, why do they get it and we can't have it?
Yeah.
So that sort of thing. We deal with these small makers who have phenomenal stories, and just the place is amazing. The process is incredible. The people are great, and they're my friends. I'm incredibly biased, actually. I'm just trying to help my friends. But hey, there are worse things to be basing your career on, I suppose.
So how was your reception as essentially a foreigner in Japan, more or less peddling Japanese products?
Yeah, it was a process. Yeah, I arrived in 2002. I was studying sake. I actually thought sake was abhorrent when I lived in the States. I used to drink it. It was like you lose a bet. And it's because nobody knew how to handle it in the 90s. And we used to call it dirty feet because it was so bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then I moved to Japan. I was like, I'm not sure I'm ready for more dirty feet. But then I was exposed to just the immense beauty that is available in Japan in the sake world. And I was loving it. But then one day, a bartender at my local was like, okay, today it's this. And he pushed some barley shochu in front of me, and I was, what's going on? And then next he pushed some sweet potato shochu in front of me. They're totally different. Then just buckwheat shochu, and then kokuto sugar shochu, and then rice shochu. It's like, how are these all the same thing? They're so different. They're all called shochu? Like, yeah. Like, how? I don't know. This is a sake bar. What do you want, man? Shut up. So then that was the beginning. And I started to, at that point, I spoke almost no English either, really, but Japanese. And I could say thank you. And then the second expression that I learned was no foam on my beer. That was the second Japanese expression that I learned, because they love to give you like a German style
massive head,
foamy head on top. I was like, stop it. I want to drink beer. So then I just traveled south to where all the distilleries are. And on Kyushu Island, there are more distilleries per capita than Scotland, Tennessee, and Kentucky combined. And it's distilling culture down there. And in fact, the place where this is made, Kagoshima Prefecture, it's smaller. That prefecture is actually geographically smaller than Connecticut, and it has 110 active distilleries. It's just ridiculous.
Busy place.
And so, yeah, you shake a stick, you hit 3 distilleries. It's like there's so many of them. And I went down there and I was like knocking on, like, can I see how you make it? Because I was a craft beer guy and I just wanted to know how it was made. And I was like, I used to work in a brewery. I get it. I respect it. I just gotta see. And most of them were like, get out of here, gringo. No. Please do not come here again. And then I'm persistent. I just keep going back. And then eventually they were like, all right, he seems to mean well. And these are small communities too. So I would get turned away from a couple of distilleries. I'd go out drinking. I'd meet some of the local old guys and drink with them. And then word would get around, oh, there's a weirdo here. He's harmless, but if he hasn't showed up at your distillery, he's going to come by. And then eventually a couple of places let me in. And then, wow, I was mystified because it's so different from making beer, making whiskey. There's no hot side. There's no boil. There's nothing. It's just so wild. So I was smitten And I was in love with the people. I was in love with the work. I respected it. It's backbreaking work. I got it. And I was in love with the products. And so then I kept going back and learning more and more and more. And then I started doing tastings. I just wanted to share it. So when I'd go back to Tokyo, I would organize tastings at cafes or bars. We'd get some bottles. The cafe or bar would provide some small plates of food, sell tickets. People would come in and we'd do a tasting. I'd do a little bit of a talk about what I had experienced and what I had learned. To get to your question, Jerry, I promise I am getting there. What quickly started happening was that even though I was targeting the import community, the non-Japanese community in Tokyo, increasingly the clientele that was attending these events was Japanese. So I was getting more and more situations where, and my Japanese was progressing, where the venue would be like, can you do it bilingual? Or in some cases, like, can you do it mostly in Japanese and that with a little bit of English translation? And then so what was happening was they just wanted a fresh perspective on this part of the culture. And I had gotten a little bit of coverage in the press. So people were saying, bartenders who knew about shochu were saying, like, he knows his stuff. He's helped make it before. So he's not out there spewing falsehoods or inaccurate information about the process. And then I was like, I need a bigger audience. So I started drafting a book, eventually published it. The Japanese government paid attention, and then things have kind of gone on from there. So I think my efforts have been mostly accepted and validated by the government and by the various guilds that are in the industry. And I don't think they really mind that I'm not Japanese. I think they appreciate the fresh energy and the extra perspective. And now that I'm actually selling their products in the States, now they have a different level of they give me even more bandwidth to do these things. So
I would say that from what I know I lived in Japan for 2 years, they're usually not very good at talking about themselves.
Fair.
So like when it comes to selling things like that, unless it's like they're reading off technical stuff, they're not gonna embellish and just give you a story about something. They'll just, oh, here it is, and that's it. Like, I mean, I don't know. I was on Okinawa.
Oh,
I don't know.
I was there for the whole month of March. Love it.
You bastard.
Yeah.
Habusaki. Did you ever have it?
Oh yeah. It's yeah, you lose a bet, you get served that crap. Yeah. Awamori with a pit viper drowned in it. Fantastic idea.
People don't know it's got a viper in the damn thing. Down there, they drink it all the fucking time. Do they drink that on the mainland? I don't even know.
No.
Never.
I mean, in an Okinawan joint, they'll have a jar of it, and then it's kind of like everybody sees it, and then what'll end up happening is people get drunk, and then somebody will send around a round of this stuff, and it's like,
every time,
you bastard, I do not need this right now.
And that's the one that always sends you way over the edge.
You never drink it until you're basically on the edge. That's when it comes out. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And it just sends you just swan dive right off and you're like, over the edge.
But I mean, I know what you're talking about. I remember like going into a sake store and it was all in jars. It's all in clear jars. And if you're trying to get a bottle of it, you're just like, you can go in and taste whatever the hell one you want and figure out what
they'll ladle it out of there.
Exactly. And you're like, if they did this in the States, they'd all be empty and people would be shit-faced on the floor. Like, but in Japan, it's a totally different world, right?
There's no stigma.
No.
You can have open containers everywhere in Japan almost. I mean, probably you're allowed to drink legally. I'm sure you're allowed to drink in elementary schools. You're allowed to drink.
At all.
Yeah, you can drink on the trains. It's fine. Just don't make a scene. Don't make a lot of noise, and people will tolerate it.
Every job, I don't care what the job was, they did it perfectly, right? And they took pride in that job. And it's something to see. Like I remember I'm from a mechanical background, so is Jerry. I remember seeing an electrical box to a building, like a circuit breaker, and being just mystified by it. Like the beauty and the craft that they take in
Yeah,
everything
the
they
intricacy
do.
of everything. Yeah.
It's amazing. So I mean, even with spirits, it's got to be to the same degree, because that's how they do everything.
That's spot on. They take everything very seriously. They take like you said, they take a lot of pride in what they're doing. Doesn't matter what they're doing. Does not matter what the vocation
No,
is.
it doesn't matter at all.
They do it to the nth degree and beyond. I've never seen, for instance, it, and please, I'm just saying, for instance, because I've spent a lot of time in New York recently, security guards everywhere. Security guards in Japan are incredibly focused on their job and do not miss a thing, and are always there where they should be. And they're not making small talk with everybody. They're not checking their phone. They're not, whatever you see all the time, doing their job. And they do that job very, very well. And it's not because there's a shit ton of competition for that job. They can't be fired. Well, that's not true. They're mostly contract employees, but yeah, it is. It's part of the culture. It's just, you do it because you chose to do it, and you do it to the best of your ability until you choose not to do it.
Yeah, we could use a lot of that here in the States. So I totally see what you're talking about, especially with security guards.
Your mouth to the Pope's ears. Yeah.
But
exactly.
just want to rewind for a second. You said that they don't do a lot of foam on their beer there in Japan?
No, they do. They do.
Oh, they do. Okay.
So,
okay.
So I would say no foam. That was the first I learned to say awanashi de kudasai, which means no foam on my beer.
I tend to just tolerate foam.
The taps are like, they do a nice pour, and then they level the glass, and then they push the tap back, and that's the foam dispenser. So they purposefully. It's like what?
Well, I was just at a bar.
You could get bottled in England for that shit.
Oh yeah, I was just at a bar. What's today? Saturday? Yeah, I was just at a bar yesterday. I'd never been there before. I was there with the group. Andy here decided to skip out, so he didn't go. But I just went up and looked at the wall of taps. I was like, I'll take a glass of the Allagash. Happens to be one of my favorites. There's like 2 inches of foam, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot of foam. And she's just like, "Dunk, yeah, we do that here," and walked away. Okay, I guess I'll drink through the foam.
Who is this with? I don't recall where this came from. It might have been in Spain, but I feel like it was in the States. So I was with a friend, and British guy, and the pour was pretty low. It was like the top of the beer was to right there. And in England, you do it like so that you're almost guaranteed to spill it when you try to move it. So it's to there, and he goes, "Hey, could you like put some lemonade in here? Just fill it up with lemonade." And the guy's like, you want lemonade in there? He's like, "Just fill it up with some lemonade." Oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. "Oh, you can fill it up with lemonade, huh?" "Yeah, I can do that." "Then why can't you fill it up with beer?" I was like, good one. And the bartender was like,
same response I got.
Yeah.
Switch.
Yeah, don't mess with my beer, guys. Come on.
I can't. Being over there, I could not stand their 2 big beers, Sapporo and Orion.
Yeah, down south. Okay.
Oh
yeah.
my God,
Orion
awful.
is the big boy.
Oh,
there's
awful.
I find this last time every March, and this is kind of embarrassing, but every March I flee to Okinawa because I have bad seasonal allergies.
Yeah, fine.
So,
dude, I'd love to be in fucking Okinawa in March.
Oh man. So we just get an Airbnb for the month and work from home down there. There's no reason to be killing ourselves in Tokyo. So there's something called a sugi, S-U-G-I, sugi tree, which is technically a Japanese cedar tree, which is very common up north of Okinawa. Mm-hmm. And the pollen from that thing is just unbelievable. It's the best thing that ever happened to the pharmaceutical industry. And so, but Okinawa doesn't have them. So
I would say Okinawa isn't bad for allergies. Plus, you always got that wind.
Yeah, true. So we just retreat, and it's glorious. And I think we're not long for Tokyo. I think Tokyo is great in its own way, but we can do everything online now. So it's just let's go somewhere where it's just a couple of gears. The pace of life is just a couple of gears lower.
Yeah, dude, go down to Oki.
Great.
Hit up the base with everything, and you'll be spreading it across the country before you know it.
Well, I think that that's a fantastic place to wrap it up. Chris is going to get every military base he can wasted on his alcohol. So where can everybody find out more about you, and how can they help get more of your products over here?
Well, if you want to find where our products are, whether or not they're near you, then you can go to our website, which is honkakuspirits.com. Honkaku is HONKAKU, honkakuspirits.com. And then our product pages have find a retailer buttons, which allow you to insert either a city name or your zip code, and then it'll show a map with the different accounts near you that have whatever product you might be looking for. And then if you want to talk more about or start a conversation about these drinks, then you can hit me up on Twitter at Chris Pellegrini. Pellegrini is Pellegrini. On Instagram, I'm relatively active, which would be at Christopher Pellegrini. I think those are the two best ones, and I'm happy to just talk about these things. Or if you're at a place and it has a menu with a decent shochu list, and you take a photo, send it to me. Which one should I have? I'm pretty quick at giving advice in those situations. So, don't be shy. Basically, just my advice to everyone is there's a shochu for everyone, really, because there's so much diversity in the spirits class. So just find the ingredient that you like, and then find the serving style that suits you best. Maybe it's on the rocks, maybe it's with sparkling water, maybe it's cut with a little bit of mineral water. Who knows? Just find what works for you and enjoy. It's this huge thing that's coming. So you might as well, there's a little bit of time left where you can be the person in your circle of friends who knows about it and, brings the bottle to the dinner party. Let me tell you about this. And before everybody else gets into it, but it's coming. So thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to talk about it here.
Thanks for being on the show. It's been great.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you.
Well, Grizz, I've learned a lot.
I'm glad, Jerry. I want to pick up some of the whiskey.
So do I.
I found it. It's near me. It's not that far. So next time I drive into Mass, I'm going to pick some up, and I will let you guys know how delicious it is.
I'll be going to Grizz's house too to check it out. As we learned in the episode, I'm diving into the whiskey world, so I'm open to try almost anything.
It kind of blows my mind that there are people out there that don't want to just try things. I guess they're too afraid of the negative outcome. But even if it's bad, you're still learning. Oh, all right, well, I know I don't want to try that again.
Yeah, well, actually, I had an experience with whiskey that was just like that. Everybody's been hyping up peanut butter whiskey, so I said, you know what? I like whiskey and I like peanut butter. I'd probably like it.
Peanut butter whiskey.
I don't like peanut butter whiskey.
No,
it was not for me.
I have a scotch in my house that is literally like drinking campfires. Not everyone enjoys that one.
That reminds me of the time I did a wine tasting, and they handed me a red wine and said, this one's delicious. So I asked them what it tastes like. And they said, well, most people describe it as tasting like Christmas. So I was like, oh, Christmas. So I took a sip and it tasted like pine trees and dirt.
It does kind of get a little bit above my head when they're talking about all the notes.
Yeah.
It's like,
it's an acquired taste. And I'd imagine that that applies directly to Honkaku Spirits and their whiskey. I have no idea what it's going to taste like, but I'm interested to try it. But, now that I've been drinking alcohol as more of a hobby, I don't get drunk. I just have a glass, maybe two. Mm-hmm. It changes the way that it tastes when you spend some time with it. You know what I mean?
Well, also as you get older, your taste buds change, right? As a kid, if you were told me I would drink scotch and rye and stuff like that as an adult, I'd be like, you're an idiot because it doesn't taste good.
Yeah, back then it tasted like rubbing alcohol. Now it doesn't.
I don't know, but that's gin.
Yeah.
You drink gin straight, you're just a madman. Thank you again for listening, beautiful bastards. New episodes every Monday. Remember to like and subscribe. I wish it were winter so we could freeze it into ice blocks and skate on it and then melt it in the springtime and drink it.
Well, alcohol may be man's worst enemy, but the Bible says, love your enemy.